The endless black of space stretched out in every direction, dotted with the cold light of distant stars. In this vast emptiness, a single ship moved through the darkness like a gray ghost. The heavy cruiser Relentless cut through the void with quiet purpose, her engines humming a low song that only her crew could hear. Captain Daniel Wright stood on the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man of 52 years, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. Deep lines marked his face, each one earned through decades of service in the United Earth Naval Command. He watched the main with the patience of a man who had learned to wait. The bridge around him was a symphony of soft sounds. Computers beeped, consoles chirped. Crew members spoke in low voices as they went about their duties. It was a routine patrol along the outer trade lanes, the kind of mission that usually meant long hours of nothing happening. Wright liked nothing happening. He had seen enough action in his younger years to appreciate the quiet times. "Captain," said Ensign Amy Collins from the helm station. She was young, only 24, with brown hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. This was her first deep space assignment, and she took every task seriously. "We're approaching Sector 774, standard patrol route completion in approximately 6 hours. Wright nodded slowly. "Very good, Ensign, maintain current heading." Commander Lisa Morgan looked up from her tactical station on the right side of the bridge. She was 38 years old, with sharp features and sharper eyes. Her red hair was cut short in a practical style, and she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how good she was at her job. "Quiet out here," she observed. "Almost too quiet." Wright allowed himself a small smile. "Don't jinx it, Commander. I've learned to appreciate boring patrols." "You and me both, sir." The bridge fell back into its comfortable routine. Officers monitored their stations. Data flowed across screens. The ship sailed on through the emptiness between stars. Lieutenant Shaw sat at the weapons station, running diagnostic checks on the ship's systems. He was 29, with a lean build and quick hands that moved across his console like a pianist at his instrument. Shaw had a gift for weapons systems. He understood them in a way that went beyond training and into something like instinct. He finished his diagnostic and leaned back in his chair. Everything was green across the board. The Relentless was ready for anything, even if anything seemed unlikely to happen. Down in engineering, Chief Bell wiped grease from his hands with a rag that was almost as dirty as his fingers. He was 45 years old, with a thick build and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Bell had been keeping ships running for over 20 years, and there wasn't a system on the Relentless that he didn't know better than its designers. He patted the main reactor housing with something like affection. "Keep singing, old girl," he murmured. "Keep singing." The reactor hummed in response, steady and strong. Back on the bridge, Wright had settled into his command chair. He was reviewing supply reports on his personal screen, the kind of paperwork that filled the hours between moments that mattered. It was tedious work, but necessary. A ship ran on logistics as much as it ran on fuel. The first warning came as a soft chime from the sensor station. Wright looked up. "Report." The sensor officer, a young man named Peter Cole, frowned at his screen. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange. Multiple energy signatures at the edge of sensor range." Morgan was already moving to look over his shoulder. "What kind of signatures?" "Unknown configuration, Commander. They're big, whatever they are, and they're moving fast." Wright rose from his chair and walked to the sensor station. His boots made soft sounds on the deck plating. He studied the screen, watching the contacts grow clearer as they approached. "How many?" he asked. Cole ran his fingers across the console. 16 contacts, sir, all maintaining formation." 16 ships. Wright felt something cold settle in his stomach. That was not a patrol. That was not a trading convoy. 16 ships moving in formation meant military. It meant intent. "Battle stations," Wright said calmly. The alarm began to wail throughout the ship. Red lights flashed at every station. Crew members who had been relaxed suddenly snapped into motion, moving to their assigned positions with practiced speed. The Relentless transformed from a cruising vessel into a fighting machine in less than 2 minutes. Shaw's hands flew across his weapons console. Coming online, missile tubes standing by, point defense systems active. Collins gripped her helm controls. Engines ready for combat maneuvers, Captain. Morgan took her position at the tactical station, her eyes locked on the incoming contacts. They'll be in visual range in 3 minutes. Wright stood in the center of the bridge, a calm eye in the storm of activity around him. He had been here before, in moments like this where everything balanced on a knife's edge. He had learned long ago that panic helped no one. "Open a channel," he ordered. "All frequencies, let's see who our visitors are." The communications officer, a woman named Sandra Price, worked her console. "Channel open, sir." Wright clasped his hands behind his back. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Daniel Wright of the United Earth Naval Command vessel Relentless. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." Static filled the bridge for a long moment. Then the main flickered, and a face appeared that made several crew members gasp. It was not a human face. The being that stared at them had scales instead of skin, dark green and glistening under harsh light. Its eyes were yellow with vertical slits for pupils, like a snake's eyes but filled with cruel intelligence. A ridge of bone ran from its forehead back over its skull, and when it opened its mouth to speak, rows of sharp teeth gleamed. "Human vessel," the creature said in a voice that was deep and rasping, translated by the ship's computers into understandable words. "I am Warlord Os of the Dominion. You are in our space. You will surrender your vessel and your crew for processing." Wright kept his expression neutral. He had heard of though he had never encountered them. They were known throughout this region of space as conquerors, a warrior species that had dominated their sector for 300 years through intimidation and overwhelming force. "Warlord Os," Wright replied steadily. "I believe there may be some misunderstanding. This is neutral space according to Galactic Treaty. The Relentless is on a peaceful patrol mission." Os made a sound that might have been laughter. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. "Treaties mean nothing to the Dominion. We take what we want. We always have. We always will." On the behind the warlord, Wright could now see the bridge of the alien vessel. It was dark and harsh, with spikes and angles that seemed designed to intimidate. Other moved in the background, their scaled bodies gleaming. "You have one chance, human," Os continued. "Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Resist and you will suffer before the end. Your crew will be processed. Your ship will be salvaged. Your species will learn what happens to those who defy the—" Wright glanced at Morgan. She gave him a small nod, her fingers already dancing across her console as she analyzed the enemy formation. "I appreciate the offer," Wright said, turning back to the screen. "But I'm afraid I need to consult with my officers before making such an important decision. May I have a moment?" Os tilted his head, a gesture that looked strange on his reptilian features. "You wish to discuss your surrender? How? Civilized? Very well, human. You have one of your minutes. Use it wisely." The screen went dark, though the channel remained open. Wright turned to his senior officers. They gathered around him quickly, their faces tight with tension. "Assessment," Wright said quietly. Morgan spoke first. 16 ships, all larger than us, but I've been analyzing their configurations. They're built for intimidation, not efficiency. Lots of armor, big guns, but their power distribution suggests slow weapon cycling times. They hit hard, but they can't keep up a sustained barrage. Shaw nodded in agreement. "I've seen designs like this before, sir. Big and scary, but they rely on shock and awe. They expect enemies to surrender before the fight really starts. That's their whole strategy." "Their formation is sloppy too," Collins added. She was pale, but her voice was steady. "They're spread out in a ring around us, but they're not accounting for each other's firing arcs. If we get in close, they risk hitting their own ships." Wright looked at Bell, who had come up to the bridge when battle stations sounded. "Engineering." Bell shrugged his thick shoulders. "Engines are solid, shields are strong. Whatever you need, Captain, I'll make sure you have the power for it." Wright nodded slowly. He looked at each of his officers in turn. These were his people. They had served with him through good times and bad. They trusted him to make the right call. Options, he said. Morgan's jaw tightened. We could surrender. They might actually let us live, at least for a while. Processing probably means slavery or worse, but we'd be alive. Or we could fight, Shaw said. His hand rested on his console, almost eager. Sir, I've run the numbers. They've got us, but not outclassed. If we hit them hard and fast before they realize we're not going to roll over. It's still 16-1, Collins pointed out. Those are bad odds no matter how you cut them. Bad odds are better than certain death, Bell rumbled. Or certain slavery. I didn't sign up for this Navy to surrender to some lizard who thinks he can take what he wants. Wright listened to them all. He thought about his crew, 347 souls on board the Relentless. He thought about his duty to keep them safe. He thought about what surrender would mean, not just for them, but for humanity's reputation among the stars. And he thought about his first ship 20 years ago, the Defiant, a pirate ambush in the sector. He had been a young commander then, second in command under a captain who chose to fight rather than surrender. They had lost that fight. 43 crew members had died, including the captain. Wright had barely escaped with his life. But he had survived, and in the years since, he had learned something important. Sometimes you lose when you fight, but you always lose when you surrender to those who see you as prey. Commander Morgan, Wright said, when humans have faced impossible odds throughout history, what have they done? Morgan met his eyes. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. They fought anyway, sir. Wright nodded. Then I believe we have our answer. He turned back to the and signaled for the channel to reopen. Oz appeared again, his yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. Have you made your decision, human? Are you ready to accept the inevitable? Wright stood tall, his shoulders squared, his voice clear and calm. Warlord Oz, I appreciate your patience. My officers and I have discussed your generous offer. The warlord's lips curled back from his teeth in what might have been a smile. And I'm afraid we must decline. For a moment, Oz seemed not to understand. His yellow eyes blinked slowly. Decline? You refuse to surrender. That's correct. Do you understand what you are saying, human? I have 16 warships, you have 1. The mathematics of your situation are simple, you cannot win. Wright allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps not, but humans have a tradition, Warlord. When we face impossible odds, when surrender would mean giving up everything we are, we have a very simple response. Oz leaned forward, his curiosity apparently piqued despite his arrogance. And what response is that? We fight anyway. The warlord stared at him for a long moment. Then he began to laugh, that grinding, ugly sound filling the bridge of the Relentless. You fight anyway, against 16 ships. You are either very brave or very stupid, human, perhaps both. I suppose we'll find out. Oz stopped laughing. His eyes narrowed and something dangerous flickered in their depths. Very well, you have chosen your fate. When this is over, when your ship is burning and your crew is begging for mercy, remember that I gave you a chance. Remember that you threw it away. I'll keep that in mind, Wright said evenly. The screen went dark. This time the channel closed completely. For a heartbeat, the bridge was silent. Then Wright turned to his crew, and his voice rang out clear and strong. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage a hostile force that believes we will surrender. They believe we are weak. They believe we will break. They are wrong. He paused, letting his words sink in. We are the crew of the Relentless. We serve the United Earth Naval Command. We carry with us the hopes of every human who has ever looked up at the stars and refused to be afraid. Today, we show the galaxy what that means. Across the ship, 347 men and women straightened at their stations. Fear was still there in the back of their minds, but something else rose up to meet it. Pride, determination, the stubborn human refusal to quit. Lieutenant Shaw, Wright continued, prepare firing solutions for all enemy vessels. Commander Morgan, coordinate our defensive strategy. Ensign Collins, be ready to show these lizards what a human pilot can do. A chorus of acknowledgments came back to him. And Chief Bell. Bell's voice came over the intercom from engineering. "Sir, give me everything the engines have got. We're going to need it." "You'll have it, Captain. The old girl's ready to dance." Wright settled into his command chair. His hands rested on the armrests, steady and sure. Around him, his crew prepared for battle. Consoles lit up with targeting data. Shields hummed to full power. The ship that had been cruising peacefully moments ago now thrummed with barely contained energy. "Here they come," Morgan announced. On the tactical display, the 16 enemy contacts began to move, closing the ring around the Relentless. Wright watched them approach. He thought about what waited for them. Death, possibly. Victory, hopefully. Either way, they would face it on their feet, fighting with everything they had. "All weapons stand ready," Shaw reported. "Charged, missiles locked. Just give the word, Captain." Wright nodded. "Hold your fire. Let them come to us. Let them think we're afraid." The ships drew closer. They were massive things, bristling with weapons and armor. Each one was at least twice the size of the Relentless, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known a prey that fought back. Collins kept her hands steady on the helm controls. Her heart was pounding, but her training held. This was what she had spent years preparing for. This was the moment that would define her career, one way or another. "Enemy vessels entering optimal firing range," Morgan announced. "They're powering weapons." Wright leaned forward slightly. "Steady." The first plasma bolt screamed across the void, a streak of superheated death aimed at the Relentless. It was followed by another and another as the ships opened fire with everything they had. "Evasive maneuvers," Wright ordered calmly. Collins moved. Her fingers danced across her console, and the Relentless responded like a living thing. The heavy cruiser rolled and twisted, sliding between the incoming fire with a grace that seemed impossible for a ship her size. Plasma bolts that should have torn through her hull instead burned through empty space. The crew felt the ship move beneath them, the artificial gravity straining to keep up with the sudden accelerations. But they held their stations, held their nerve, held their faith in the young pilot who was flying them through hell. "They can't believe it," Morgan said, watching the enemy formation on her display. "Their firing patterns are getting sloppy. They expected us to just sit there and take it." "Their mistake," Wright replied. "Lieutenant Shaw, you may return fire." Shaw had been waiting for those words. His targeting computer had already calculated optimal firing solutions. All he had to do was pull the trigger. The Relentless spoke with thunder. Her fired, accelerating tungsten slugs to a fraction of the speed of light. The projectiles crossed the distance to the nearest enemy ship in less than a second. They punched through armor that had been designed to withstand anything, tearing through the destroyer like it was made of paper. The ship broke apart, its hull crumpling inward from the impacts. Fire bloomed in the silence of space as atmosphere ignited and escaped into the void. Secondary explosions rippled through the dying vessel as power systems failed and weapons cooked off. In less than 5 seconds, one of Oss's proud warships was reduced to an expanding cloud of debris. On the bridge of the warlord's flagship, silence fell. Oss stared at the tactical display, watching the icon that represented his destroyer flicker and disappear. He could not believe what he was seeing. In 300 years of conquest, no single ship had ever destroyed one of his vessels so quickly. "Impossible," he whispered. His subordinates shifted nervously around him. They had expected an easy victory, a quick surrender followed by the rewards that came with conquest. They had not expected this. "Warlord," one of his officers said carefully, "the human ship is moving into our formation." Oss snapped out of his shock. He turned to the tactical display, watching as the tiny human vessel accelerated toward his fleet instead of trying to flee. It was the opposite of what any sane commander would do. "They're insane," he growled. "All ships concentrate fire, destroy them." His fleet responded, every ship turning its weapons toward the Relentless. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the void, creating a wall of death that nothing should have been able to survive. But Collins had already anticipated their response. She had seen their firing patterns, had noted the gaps in their coverage. She threaded the needle with impossible precision, sliding the Relentless through openings that existed for only fractions of a second. "They're not used to this," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "They've never had to actually aim before." Wright heard her and felt a surge of pride. His young pilot was performing beyond anything he could have hoped for. She was keeping them alive against odds that should have been insurmountable. "Shaw, keep firing," he ordered. "Pick your targets, make every shot count." Shaw with deadly efficiency. He spoke again and again, each burst finding a new target. A second destroyer staggered as slugs tore through its engine section, leaving it dead in space. A third took hits to its weapons arrays, silencing half its guns. The formation began to break apart as ships tried to reposition to deal with the threat that was now among them. But their size worked against them. They couldn't turn fast enough, couldn't coordinate their fire without risking hitting each other. Morgan watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. "They're panicking, Captain. They don't know how to handle a fight like this." Wright nodded grimly. "They've spent 300 years making other species surrender. They've forgotten how to actually fight." "Then let's remind them," Morgan said. The battle continued, a deadly dance of fire and steel among the stars. The Relentless weaved through the enemy formation, striking and moving, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. Shaw's weapons found their marks again and again, while Collins's piloting kept them one step ahead of destruction. But they could not avoid everything. A plasma bolt caught the port side, overloading the shields in that section and scorching the hull beneath. The ship shuddered with the impact, and damage reports began flowing in. "Hull breach in Section 7, Bell reported from engineering. "Sealing it now, shields are down to 60%. Wright acknowledged the report without taking his eyes off the battle. "Keep us in the fight, Chief." "Aye, sir, she's got plenty more to give." Another ship died, its reactor going critical under sustained fire. The explosion lit up the void like a small sun, and for a moment the battle seemed to pause as both sides took in the scale of the destruction. Oz watched from his flagship, his hands clenched so tightly that his claws drew blood from his palms. 4 ships. He had lost 4 ships to a single human vessel. It was impossible. It was unacceptable. It was happening. "How," he demanded of his officers, "how is this happening?" No one had an answer for him. They had never seen anything like this. Their entire strategy, their entire way of war, was built on the assumption that enemies would break before the fight really started. They had no plan for an enemy that refused to break. "Concentrate all remaining ships on the human vessel," Oz ordered. "I don't care what it costs, destroy them." The 12 surviving ships began to close in, forming a formation that would give the Relentless less room to maneuver. They were learning, adapting, however slowly. Collins saw the change and reported it. "They're getting smarter, Captain. The formation is tightening up." Wright considered the situation. They had done incredible damage so far, but the enemy was adapting. If they stayed in the middle of the formation, they would eventually corner them. "Pull us out," he ordered. "Open some distance, let's see how they respond." Collins and the Relentless accelerated away from the formation. The ships pursued, their larger engines struggling to match the human vessel's speed. Shaw used the breathing room to reload and recalibrate. "Are heating up, Captain. I can keep firing, but accuracy will start to drop if we push them too hard." "Understood. Prioritize your targets. Go for their engines and weapons. Dead ships and disarmed ships both take them out of the fight." The chase continued, with the Relentless staying just ahead of the formation while Shaw picked off targets of opportunity. Another destroyer lost its engines and fell behind, unable to continue the pursuit. A cruiser took hits to its weapons arrays and could no longer fire. But the Relentless was taking damage too. Another plasma bolt found its mark, and more hull breaches opened along the port side. Crew members worked frantically to seal the damage, but the ship was being worn down. Bell's voice came over the intercom, strained but steady. "Captain, we've got problems. Power fluctuations in the main reactor. I can keep us running, but if we take many more hits like that last one..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Wright understood. Understood, Chief. Do what you can. The battle was reaching a critical point. The Relentless had done incredible damage, reducing the enemy fleet by a third, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Something had to change. Wright studied the tactical display, looking for an opportunity. He found it in the enemy flagship. Oss's ship was hanging back from the main pursuit, its warlord apparently unwilling to risk himself directly. But it was also the largest and most heavily armed vessel in the fleet. Taking it out would break the enemy's command structure and might cause the rest to flee. It was a risk, a huge risk, but Wright had not won battles throughout his career by playing it safe. "Collins," he said, "I need you to do something crazy." The young pilot looked back at him, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "How crazy, sir?" "We're going for the flagship, straight at it full speed." Collins blinked, then she smiled, a fierce expression that transformed her young face. "Aye, sir, crazy it is." She brought the Relentless around, and the heavy cruiser shot toward the enemy flagship like an arrow from a bow. The pursuing ships scrambled to adjust, but they were too slow. The human vessel had opened a gap, and now it was exploiting that gap with everything it had. Oss saw them coming. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. The human ship was heading straight for him, ignoring the rest of his fleet, coming for him personally. "All weapons," he roared, "stop them." His flagship's guns opened up, filling the space between them with plasma fire. It was the most intense barrage of the battle, enough firepower to destroy a dozen ships. Collins flew through it. She pushed herself and her ship to the absolute limit, reacting to threats before they fully materialized, anticipating the enemy's fire through some combination of skill and instinct that bordered on precognition. The Relentless twisted and rolled and dove, threading through gaps that shouldn't have existed. They took hits. The shields finally failed completely, and armor began to ablate under the plasma fire. Sections of the hull glowed red, then white, then began to melt. Crew members died at their stations, killed by the heat and radiation that penetrated the damaged ship. But they kept coming. Shaw fired the one final time. The slugs crossed the remaining distance in a heartbeat and slammed into the flagship's bridge section. The impact was devastating. The bridge crumpled inward, exposing the interior to the void of space. Atmosphere rushed out, carrying bodies and debris. The flagship's main systems began to fail as the damage cascaded through its structure. On what remained of his bridge, Oss clung to a twisted piece of metal, his scales frozen by the cold of space. He had only seconds to live, and he spent them staring at the human ship that had destroyed him. He still couldn't understand. How had they done it? How had one small ship defeated his entire fleet? What were these humans? His final thought, as the cold claimed him, was that perhaps some species were not meant to be conquered. The flagship died in a massive explosion as its reactor went critical. The shockwave buffeted the Relentless, but the human ship rode it out, battered but still flying. Wright looked at the tactical display. The enemy flagship was gone. 4 more ships had been destroyed during the final charge. Only 7 vessels remained, and they were already breaking formation, their will to fight shattered by the death of their warlord. "They're running," Morgan reported, a note of disbelief in her voice. "They're actually running." Wright watched the remaining enemy ships flee into the darkness. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a deep sadness for all the lives lost on both sides. "Let them go," he said quietly. "We've made our point." The bridge was silent except for the crackle of damaged systems and the groans of stressed metal. The Relentless had survived, but she had paid a heavy price. Smoke filled the air. Emergency lights flickered. The smell of burned insulation was everywhere. Collins slumped in her chair, her hands trembling from the strain. Shaw leaned back from his console, his face pale but satisfied. Morgan looked at the tactical display, watching the last enemy contacts fade into the distance. Wright stood from his command chair and walked to the center of the bridge. He looked around at his crew, at the men and women who had fought and bled, and some who had died. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Well done, he said, his voice rough with emotion. All of you, well done. Bell's voice came over the intercom from engineering. Captain, she's hurt bad, but she'll hold together. We'll get her home. Wright nodded even though Bell couldn't see him. I know you will, Chief. I never doubted it. He turned to the now showing the empty space where a hostile fleet had been. 16 ships had come to demand their surrender. 7 had fled, broken and terrified. 9 had been destroyed, including the flagship and its arrogant warlord. The relentless had won. But Wright knew this was only the beginning. Word of this battle would spread. The galaxy would learn what had happened here, how a single human ship had faced a superior force and refused to surrender. Some would respect that. Others would want to test it for themselves. More fights were coming. More battles, more moments where everything hung in the balance. Wright was ready. His crew was ready. And humanity, spread across the stars, would always be ready to face whatever challenges came their way. Because that was who they were. That was what they did. They fought anyway. The relentless turned toward home, trailing smoke and debris but unbowed. Her engines hummed their steady song, carrying her crew through the darkness toward safety and repair, and eventually, inevitably, back into the void. Behind them, the wreckage of the fleet drifted silently among the stars. It was a monument to arrogance, a warning to any who might make the same mistake. Humanity does not surrender. And those who forget that lesson will learn it the hard way.